Yes, thanks, Last Corda. Minister.
You move the amendment.
Oh yes, I move Amendment 10. And what this amendment proposes, in line with calls for such new taxes, COVID solidarity taxes, that are being made across the world. In some cases, some jurisdictions are actually implementing COVID solidarity taxes to give real effect to the idea that we're all in it together. Now, people before profit and solidarity have, for a very long time, argued that there is a huge disparity in the distribution of income and in the distribution of wealth, and that gap between the rich and the poor in income and in wealth grows pretty much every year, year on year, and has grown to really quite obscene levels in recent years. And even without COVID-19, needs to be addressed. I know the Minister has read Piketty's Capital, so I know he knows the argument. But it doesn't ever feature in reality in the thinking of any government that I've seen since I've been elected in the Dáil to think, as they head into a budget, one of the things we must do is narrow the gap between rich and poor. Never ever heard that feature as a priority in a budget. Never ever heard a Minister for Finance on budget day get up and say there's a problem that the richest 10% of our population have 58% of all the wealth. That the richest 1% have more wealth than the poorest 50%. Just isn't deemed a problem. But I tell you, if you went to any school child and set out those facts and said, do you know that there's 1% of the population have more wealth than the poorest half of the population, I think they'd express disgust and say something should be done about it. That that's not fair. How could that be? And yet it is. And the gap grows, and it grows again and again, year on year. But then along came COVID, and suddenly governments were forced, in order to achieve the collective social action that was necessary to prevent COVID-19 overwhelming our society, they came up with what could be a socialist slogan. It could have been Karl Marx or James Connolly who coined it. We're all in it together. People, because they understood the threat of COVID-19, bought into that. People had to make sacrifices for the greater good, for the collective good, that we should all be in it together. And as we know, some people paid a very harsh price for COVID-19. Some paid with their lives, some paid with severe illness, some paid with being worked to the bone on the front line of our health services. Some of those working to the bone on the health services not getting paid at all, like student nurses and midwives. Some who lost their jobs and livelihoods because of the public health measures that they embraced with great commitment, even though it meant huge economic sacrifice for them and their families, and that sacrifice continues as we speak. Some sectors who have not had a day's work since the measures were introduced in March, like people, musicians, people in the arts and entertainment, event sector, bar workers, or taxi drivers who've had their incomes slaughtered, many of whom haven't worked since March because there's no work out there. They have really suffered in the collective effort that we're all in it together. And frankly, the supports, although the government will say they are unprecedented, the lack of supports for many of them will be felt, and felt significantly, as we head into Christmas, because their incomes are down, but others have seen their incomes continue at that high level, and some of the profits made by some of the wealthiest corporations have actually shot up. Now, surely in the context of COVID, surely against the background of we're all in it together, if the government didn't accept there was a time for a wealth tax before this to redistribute wealth for a greater level of equality, surely they would accept. There is a case for doing that now, when some people are going to enter into Christmas really significantly impoverished by what has happened and what is happening over the last year. As well as maybe, if we were to take it a step further, to actually address the structural, deep, growing, obscene inequalities in wealth and income. So I think the time has come. If all the rhetoric we heard about COVID actually being a milestone, a threshold moment where we had to go forward to a new type of normality, we're going to learn the lessons of the existential threat that COVID has presented, how it's made us see new priorities about what's important and about who's essential and all the rest of it. If all of that is to mean anything and not just be hollow words that were used to elicit a bit of sacrifice from people, surely now the time it has come for a solidarity tax to be paid by the big and wealthy corporations and by the very richest in our society in order to redistribute some of that wealth, income and profits down to those who are suffering because of structural inequality and because of the particular hardships that some have suffered in the course of COVID-19.
Any other deputy indicating? No. Okay, Minister.
Last Cairn-Corla, 1% of taxpayers in Ireland pay 23% of the total income tax paid in our country. That is the reality of those who have the most are paying the most. The top 20% of earners within our country pay 77% of the total income and USC that is collected in Ireland in 2020. So when Deputy Boyd Barrett calls for those who have more to pay more, the reality is we have a tax code that is delivering that at the moment. We have a tax code because of how USC is structured and how it interacts with income tax. It means that those who have a far higher level of income than others pay a far higher level of tax than others. So when you talk about putting in place a fair tax system or a fairer tax system, we should evaluate that claim and that call against the fact that we already have a tax code that ensures that those who are very wealthy in our country pay a high level of income tax, as it should be, and that is what our system delivers. Now, I note in what you have said that you haven't specified the level of income tax rates that would apply under this proposal. It is estimated that the removal of the application of USC on all incomes below €70,000, as suggested, would cost around €1.6 billion in a single year. And assuming that no other policy changes were made to the structure of the charge, it is likely that if a new tax took the form of a new USC rate for those earning over €100,000, it would need to be as high as 14.6%. That in turn would mean that the marginal rates of tax for those who earn more will go up very, very, very quickly. Now, Deputy Boyd Barrett, I know, will probably be comfortable with that. I think he would probably, that's something he will want to achieve. But for me, Deputy Boyd Barrett, there are two things that are important in this debate. The first one is having a tax code that ensures that those who have more income pay more tax. The other thing is having a tax code that does ensure that jobs that could be located in other countries are located in Ireland. And the tax code that we have, and that I'm defending here, gets the balance right between being fair and also one that is competitive in ensuring that we have certain kinds of work and certain numbers of jobs located within our country. And that's why I believe that the measure that you're proposing here, while I can absolutely understand the attraction of it, I don't believe would be in the best interest of ensuring that we will have a tax code that continues to be competitive and continues to do nearly the most important thing for a tax code in an open economy like Ireland, which is help keep jobs. And the battle for jobs, the battle for foreign direct investment, is only one that is going to intensify in the years to come. And I do, Deputy Boyd Barrett, believe that what you are looking to do is one that will be harmful to Ireland in the contest for those jobs. So it's for that reason I don't believe that the policies that you're advocating here would be good for our country, good for keeping jobs in our country, and also I don't believe that this is a matter that is best dealt with by a report in the Finance Bill, which is why I don't accept your amendment, Deputy.
Richard Boyd Barrett, yep.
I'll give you a little small instance that was in the news today of where we need a bit of redistribution. Even if you take one of the sort of tax breaks that, because the figures are around similar, one of the tax breaks that currently go to wealthy executives from some of the big multinational corporations you're talking about, the special assignee relief, tax relief, which is about 8 million, I think, this year. The Minister can tell me if I'm right, but I think it's about 8 million. It's not a huge amount, but that's a tax relief that goes to people on the very, very highest salaries. And that figure is about the same figure that would have allowed the Minister for Arts to give a grant to every single musician who applied for the music industry stimulus programme, but where, because there wasn't enough money in that pot and the figure they needed was about 8 million, 87% of the musicians who applied for that grant fund to be able to record, to make a single or an album this year, were denied the support. 87% of 1,400 musicians and artists. Now, those are jobs. Those are livelihoods. Those are people who've been impacted by COVID. Now, wouldn't it be fair if some of the tax breaks going to the millionaires and the top executives and the very wealthy, instead of going to a handful of them already rich people, went to 1,400 musicians who were on their knees because of the pandemic? That's just a small instance. But I think it's a telling one, that there's a problem. There is an inequality. And just lastly, I will say, Taoiseach, our Minister, the reason why the top 1% or 10% pay such a high proportion of tax is because they have about 40% of all income and they have about 58% of all wealth.
Thank you. Nobody else indicated. Minister.
I know Minister Martin, put in place the music stimulus fund that Deputy Boyd Barrett is referring to try to support artists at what is such a difficult time. And I know she has the ability to continue that fund into 2021. And I hope that those artists who were unsuccessful in being able to gain access to the fund this year might be able to access the fund later on this year or maybe next year. But Deputy, the other side of the coin that you're referring to is, in order to put in place the kind of initiatives that you're referring to, such as the Music Stimulus Fund, in order to fund many of the public services that we have, and you want more of them. We're a small country, as you know. We're a small country in which there is a big contest underway for the kind of investment that we have in our country. And to keep that investment in place, an element of that is having personal tax codes that are competitive. And you referred to the group of people that do often work in very senior roles in very big companies in our country that are very well paid, and some of whom do participate in the SAR programme that you refer to. But their location here in Ireland and the work that they do is part of the reason why we then have hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of people working in the companies that those senior people run in our country. Deputy, I can just assure you that the roles that we are referring to there, the ones that you are raised, we are surrounded by countries that would be very eager to see that work located elsewhere. And it is for that reason that I believe the tax code that we have does get the balance right between being competitive and fair, and does deliver the kind of fairness of taxation that I referred to a moment ago.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Richard Boyd Barrett to conclude, if you want to.
Okay, I think the argument has been made, but I'll just make two very brief points. Did you hear Brendan Boyle, the congressman from Pennsylvania, who was on Morning Ireland on the day of Biden's victory? And he was asked about this. He was asked about the Ireland's low corporate tax rate, tax breaks and all the rest of it. And he said, actually, that isn't the main reason they're here. He said it's because of, it was questioned quite hard by whoever the Morning Ireland team was that morning. And he said, no, they're not there primarily for that reason. They're here because you're English speaking, you have a skilled and educated workforce, and because you're part of the European market. Tax is of lesser importance. And he was asked directly if we increase the tax take a bit from those multinationals, would they leave? And he said he didn't think so. So just to say, I don't buy that argument that they couldn't pay a bit more than in some cases the 1 or 2% that they're paying, not the 12.5% they're supposed to be paying. So that's one thing. And I'm sorry, as important as those executives are, I don't think they'd leave if some of the tax breaks they're already getting on their inflated salaries went to the musicians. Because you see, those musicians have contributed as much culturally, economically, and in every other way to the prosperity of our country, to the richness of our country in the broadest sense, as any executive of a multinational company. In fact, I would argue they've contributed very significantly more.
How stands the amendment? Right, the amendment has been pressed.